these elections. And that brings into focus the recent appointment of commissioners for the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. Of course, they were sworn in by the president last week, and we do know that what that means is that there are new faces in the electoral monitoring body in Nigeria now. And of course, the agitation for the adoption of the Justice Owe's report on electoral reform. That is also one issue that has been on the front burner for quite a while now. That report has been gathering dust on the shelves somewhere. I don't know where, but somewhere it's gathering dust. And there's an agitation, there's a clamor now for the adoption and implementation of that report. We will be talking about that and of course the recent appointments of the commissioners in INEC. We have Austin Aigbe joining us now. Austin is the advocacy officer and ECOWAS liaison lead of the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, or DEMOS. Good morning, Austin.
Good morning. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. You're welcome to the show. All right. Maybe I'll just touch points first before we get into the meat of the matter today on what you think about the voters' bill, asking Nigerians that this bill will ensure that everybody must compulsorily vote, because I saw your intakes on it.
Well, for people who support the bill, they support it for many reasons. And arguably, they say it will increase the turnout of voters, which is correct, very okay. And they say that it will grant some level of legitimacy to elected officials. And they argue, especially coming from the Anambra election of 2021, wherein about 10% of Anambarians voted for the government of Anambra State. So when you look at it, you then begin to think about some legitimacy question that 90% didn't vote. And of course, in the 2023 elections in Nigeria, only about 28% voted in that election. And you can also say that for 28, if you write JAM or WAEC and the person scored 28, that's failure. So for 28% to vote in a Nigerian president, you will say arguably that's really low. For those opponents, for those supporters who say that compulsory voting should come, they have those views. And they cite some weird examples. For instance, they talk about the Australian model. And when they cite those kind of examples, it gives me some worry. So first is this. The Nigeria election as of today is worrisome. People are not even willing to vote because of the way in which previous elections have turned out. There is voter suppression. We have not dealt with suppression of voters. We have not dealt with insecurity. We have not dealt with violence. We have not dealt with a number of challenges, particularly integrity of poll. We are talking about an election wherein some talks created some avenue to deprive huge number of people from voting. Aside the case of Lagos in 2023 elections, where there were massive folks going to certain locations to deprive them. So the question is, if you make vote compulsory, will the state protect these individuals who show up to vote? In the Anambra election of 2021, I cited the example of the Anambra very remarkably. In Anambra election of 2021, there was a huge violent concern that there were even speculation that if you come out to vote, it was a vote and die hashtag. But the INEC went ahead to conduct an election, and in fact, that's why we are worried that only 10% voted. But the question is, are you going to expect 30% or 50% of voters in Anambra, wherein you have massive conflict? Let me know about conflict. The state was in a conflict situation. Before the election, there was almost like mass killings, whether it was court-related mass killing or politically related. But there were deprivation of voters. There were massive fake news. Let me not let that out. That created some sense. Even people I spoke to in Anambra 2021 said, I even told them that the election was going to go on, and the election will. They said yes, let the election go on, but I want to be alive to participate in future elections. We need to build trust in our system first. We need to deal with certain concerns. I like compulsory voting, but is Nigeria right? No. But when you now use Australian model, it gives me concern. There is no vote buying in Australia. There is no intimidation of voters in Australia. There is no suppression of voters. There is no challenge going to pick a PVC. Well, INEC has dealt with that now. Hopefully that it happened in the next election. In Australia, you vote your conscience, let me put it that way. And you are using Australia, of course Brazil, Bolivia, but you did not use Ghana. Ghana does not have compulsory voting. Rwanda does not have compulsory voting. Rwanda had about 94% turnout of voters.
Absolutely, and the reason why I asked you that question as a touch point is because one, election mindsets are one of the critical elements for the success of an election, and some of those processes also involve appointment of INEC commissioners. Now, there has been the agitation of the adoption of the Justice Uwe's report, and going back, brilliant document by exceptional minds and remarkable erudite scholars in Nigeria put together. Like Kunle said, it must be somewhere gathering dust. Somebody said he's put in a box. I don't know, whichever, both of them, in a box gathering dust.
So it's probably not gathering dust,
yes.
but the box is gathering dust.
Yeah, the box is gathering dust. So tell us exactly how this mindset is shaped from the process of appointing INEC commissioners and then taking it back to what must be done in terms of the adoption.
So you know that perception is reality until you see the otherwise. The appointment of INEC leadership. When I talk about leadership, I talk about the chair, the 12 national commissioners, and the 36 resident electoral commissioners, appointed by one individual who also participates in an election. The Constitution created for the president, not necessarily Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The Constitution created for the president a conflict of interest situation. There's a commission paper that we're working on recently, which is still ongoing, commissioned by the African Center for Leadership and Strategy, Development Strategy, Center LSD. That paper tried to pull out the Waste Committee report to interrogate it further. The Waste report did not specifically mention how the independent body should function. The Waste report said it recommended an independent body for the nomination or recommendation or selection of INEC leadership. And it stops there. Every conversation around the Waste report tends to be looking at what kind of things should that be. And it domiciled that leadership in NJC, the National Judicial Council. And people have argued, I belong to that school of thought, that if you keep it with NJC, it's still within an entity of government that at the end of the day, who appoints the Chief Justice of the Federation, it is still the President of the Federation. So at the end of the day, there's really nothing that has changed. So we went further to try to look at what works. Recently, the President sworn in 2 national commissioners. I did spend time to look at their background. One a professor in Ebonyi, and the other, which I would like to talk about, maybe not to mention names. Mm-hmm. He worked in INEC as election logistics officer, that kind of EPM role. He was the one in charge of logistics. That individual is now appointed as national leader of INEC, national commissioner. That perception that it sends to me as an individual already shows that this is someone who is being thanked, maybe for the role he played before. That perception I'm saying is reality. Whether the national commissioner actually will be that individual or not, but there's what we call the actual perception, wherein you think that for the president to have appointed this individual and knowing the person's background, you are trying to correlate. Is it possible that this man is going to do one thing or the other because we saw what happened in 2023 election? And that is a concern. And that is why the Waste Committee reported that for the president who participates in an election, also nominates the people who run the election. I know INEC sometimes will try to run away, that they don't run election. That it is the people who conduct the election are the NYC ad hoc officials. But at the end of the day, who make the decision? I know when I hear some of our leaders at INEC making such a action, it gives me some problem. When the glitches happened, it was not the ad hoc official that took the decision. It was INEC leadership that took the decision. When there was crisis, on who actually won in Adamawa election. It was not official that took the decision. It was INEC leadership. So what am I saying? The president are solely responsible for the appointment of INEC leadership, create some force or actual perception that is worrisome. That of course, give birth to the kind of trust deficit that when you talk about INEC today, whether on radio, everybody kept talking about improve INEC, improve INEC. To improve INEC, it has to start from its leadership selection process. How leadership emerge to be responsible for the conduct of election matter. It's like folks who watch football, maybe Man U or Chelsea, and the Chelsea manager is the one appointing the referee and the assistant referee. And then you go into that field of play and you expect Man U not to complain. There will always be opposition. The opposition will always and always think that the process is not fair. That this so-called umpire is not truly independent because of the manner in which the personnel who runs this election are selected. We have this proposal, and this proposal is very clear. Number one, after the election of 2007 or 2008 in Kenya, that led to the violence in that election, they came back together and said, what do we do? Part of what they identified as a concern was the electoral management body, the IEBC, the Independent Electoral Boundary Commission. And they then reviewed their constitution to create a panel responsible for the selection of these members of this commission. What did they do? This panel is responsible for recruiting, and the recruitment takes process, including advertorial. Everyone who will serve in this independent body should apply. There need to be some criteria before individuals like that are appointed. And they still kept the role for the president. The president's role is to nominate this candidate. So what the panel will do for Nigeria, there are certain individuals who we can put together. It may not be individuals like personality, it can be institutional membership. Wherein what this panel need to do can pop up 3 names from a rigorous process. Those 3 names are sent to the president. From that 3 names, the president nominates one to the National Assembly for vetting and, of course, a confirmation and then appointment. I think there need to be that threshold. That if people, Nigerians, see that transparent process leading to the membership of INEC, the leadership of INEC, trust will show up. And I trust Nigerians. They will show up at the ballot booths. The reason why many Nigerians are not showing up to vote, there's that perception that they don't do it now. If you go on the street, they'll tell you, someone told me, I see on TV, I said, see, we don't know when we win 2027. I said, you don't know? He said, yes, we know go win. I said, who? He told me. So we smile. It is a perception. And it's a very wrong perception that people already have concluded 2027 election. That kind of individual may not vote on election day because he knows, according to him, he knows who will win.
So there's already voter apathy.
It's been created by the knowers of previous elections. When we say voter turnout was poor in 2023 election, we did not count all of those suppressed votes. We did not count locations where violence eventually took place and all of those votes were cancelled. So let me also tell you, and I like when Ezewan make this assertion, Ezewan Wango, when he makes this assertion that the people you saw on that voter register, 93 million plus registered voters, arguably, maybe about 50% of that number, or maybe 50% is too much, let's even say 20 million, may have registered to vote, may have registered not to vote. They register in order to pick up the card. The PVC is the only, arguably, the cheapest, let me not say the only cheapest, the cheapest card to acquire that you don't need to pay a lot of money. Even if you have to pay money at all, you don't pay money to acquire the PVC. But you can go to the bank and use it to open a bank account. It's the only national identity that really don't require your finance because the government prints it. Check the others: passport, driver license, even the NIN. At the end of the day, there are many Nigerians who went for the PVC, the permanent voters card, because they needed a national identity for other official work. They did not register to vote. Those individuals Whether they like it or not, they may never vote. And we also talked about the crisis in the Northeast, where based on invasion of communities, those PBCs and so people living in IDP camps, they are not worried about voting. What they are worried about is their livelihood. In Abraham Maslow's world, you first of all have to talk about the need for housing, shelter, food, clothing, before someone can even think about voting. In this case, those in IDP camps, are you going to prosecute them? In any case, I'm going to tell the Honorable, particularly the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who sponsored the bill,
yes,
that if this bill is passed, which will be congratulations, I would like it because it will increase voters, but be sure to create more prison rooms, because there will be many poor Nigerians that will have to go to prison because they will not be able to pay 100,000 naira. For the rich man, he will pay for all his children. The worst case is that it's 1 million naira, 10 of them, and they are done.
Now, Austin, let's leave that bill for a while, and let's look at the issues raised by the Justice Owe's panel, which, of course, was made up of eminent Nigerians. And one of the critical recommendations is that no elected person should assume office until any pending case against him or her at the tribunal has been disposed of, because doing so, allowing that to happen, has been the reason why Nigeria is where it is today, because somebody whose election is being contested gets into office, has access to public funds, and uses the public funds to defend himself before the tribunal, and sometimes a lot of things happen that eventually may or may not sway the decision of the tribunal in his favor. Now, my question is, the House of Reps is looking at making voting compulsory, but should this that I've just talked about not be of more importance to members of the National Assembly? Because it looks to me like a key component of what will make Nigerians want to really vote, because they will understand that if something goes wrong at the polling level, it will be resolved before anyone gets to take office.
Fantastic. However, maybe just to also let you know that the bill of that manner is already in the National Assembly, that all cases will be disposed until an elected official is sworn in. But let's come to Nigeria's status today. Election will take place in February, and swearing in is in May. You know the legal jurisprudence. It takes 180 days for the first layer of the first process, usually the tribunal. And it takes another 60 days for appeal. Even though the proposal is also saying, another proposal is also saying that for the governorship election, there's no need to go to the Supreme Court. It should end at the level of appeal, which means you need about 200 days minimum. So 200 days from February to May, we could count that. I mean, it's about 240 days, 180 plus 60, 240 days. So 240 days, 30, that's February, March, April, May. That's 5 months. That's about 150 days, if it's 30 days. So at the end of the day, we must then change the May 29th swearing-in date so that it's open. But if you do that, have we also talked about the implication of a lacuna? Because these are some of the things, in an attempt to support that bill, I've been trying to brainstorm on what happened between May 29th, when the current office holder tenure ends, and until there's such a time, maybe in August, July, June, when the person eventually win in court is sworn in. Are you going to give it to the Chief Judge of the Federation? If you give it to the Chief Judge of the Federation, and the Chief Judge, who is not elected, eventually sees an opportunity, is now in control, is now the head of state and commander of the armed forces, anything can happen that period. If you say, no, let's not give the Chief Judge the commander-in-chief, let's make one army general the commander-in-chief. An army general, the commander-in-chief, within this period, there can be a challenge. So there needs to be a real critical review of that process so that we can truly say, until there's a court process that ends, the former office holder continues to run. That will be another technicality in court. But I'm just putting it because it's good we have this conversation to try to then pin what is actually better for us. Otherwise, in an attempt to solve a problem, you create another problem if you don't interrogate it in a way that is mutually beneficial. And I think with ways, as at the time that policy, that paper was, the report was sent to the president, it was clear that they would have, by now, would have dealt with it. It's like a proposal on electronic voting. People are saying, how are you going to do it? It's even much easier to eradicate ballot papers and to trust the system than, you know, there are a lot. You see, let me tell you why we have cases in court. It's also, I mean, there are 1, 2, 3 reasons that I've deduced. One, let me start from the weirdest one, if that word is correct, weirdest. In the course of doing one research work, somebody mentioned to me, and I needed to do some background check and do an in-depth study on it. I tried to speak to some politicians who appeared in court, who were in court over election issues. One of the politicians told me, I felt ashamed, but I was not ashamed because that's the reality. I said, but in that year election, I discovered that, arguably, there's no way you could have proved substantial non-compliance. Number one, the party agent you deployed did not go around the polling unit, because as required by law, you should have party agent, and if you want to prove, you must prove based on your polling unit. It is polling unit by polling unit. He told me, he said he didn't go to court to go and prove anything. He went to court to go and be popular.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I said, how? He said every time they mention the case in court, they mention his name.
Indeed.
And I said, in fact, I have never heard that. And he said, well, you know your name, my name? If they mention the case, and they mention it on radio, is my honorable. And I said, what? I said, wait, that's, and I mean, because you have to flow. And I said, wait, that's a great strategy. He said, yeah, that's a strategy for the next election. So you have to stay on the course of action. How can you even think about that? That a politician can make that assertion?
I'm stunned, Austin.
Yeah. So as
stunned.
Astonishingly as that, then you then get to the next point where people truly felt cheated. And one way to seek justice is to appear in court. One way to seek justice. Another way, of course, I'll be speaking to lawyers this time. In the course of also doing this work, a lawyer told me that's when I knew that the easiest way to become a senior advocate of Nigeria is to do
election petitions.
Election petitions. And I said, does that mean? He said, yes, that's what he's telling me. I mean, I didn't say, does that mean? He said, yes. And I said, what do you mean? He said, see, if you want to be senior advocate of Nigeria, forget all your criminal cases. They are good. Can make you money, you can even do pro bono, it's fine. But if you don't do election petition cases that takes you up to the Supreme Court, that sends a signal that one politician said he wasn't really interested. But a lawyer approached him to say, you want that election, we'll fight it together. All you need, don't worry, don't pay. I will give you this case, pro bono. And I tried to find out, are you sure? He said, yes. He went to court, arguably because he saw free legal service. Those two, however astonishing as it may be, is something we need to think about. So some of those cases, I don't want to say most, some of those cases you saw in court are just people who have encouraged politicians. One wants to be popular, wants to remain on the radio or TV, or the other, I mean, you'll be shaking your head. On AIT, when you report tribunal cases, you mention some of those names unconsciously because yours is to report news. His objective is to put his name on the news.
It's to be in the news.
And stay in the news. You see strategy? I don't know what we do. The best way to deal with those is, one, create an integrity process for election. One, we must begin by the appointment of INEC. Two, we must clean up our electoral system. And I think that in cleaning up the electoral system, a fundamental entry point will be electronic voting. And I say this without missing words. In India, 980 million registered voters. 980 million. Of that number, in the 2024 election, 600 million plus turned out to vote. Indian Electoral Commission make every effort to take the machine, the voting machine, it's electronic, the voting machine to a place, even if it's one voter that is there. Commitment. Somebody will come and tell you in Nigeria that, are you aware of the illiterate in Nigeria, they cannot use the device? And I'm worried because Nigeria rate of, we are not, our total population is about 200 million or 250 million, whatever the number is. In India, illiterate, those who cannot read and write in India, they are about 300 million, more than Nigeria population, and they use electronic voting. If you say, because people talk about electronic voting, usually look at internet voting, which is different. Internet voting is that you vote from the comfort of your home. You can vote diaspora
using your phone or your tab.
On your tab, but electronic voting will require you to go to the polling unit.
All right, let me come in here.
Beyond that, just to say, in an attempt to maintain credibility, and you can do what they call electronic voting with a paper ballot tray. That machine will print a paper ballot and put it in a box and still count the two. If you are thinking of a possibility of hacking, Nigeria is not right.
All right, that I would tell. But let's look at the constitutional amendment. I mean, in terms of looking at the Ways report and how, we could insulate INEC from the political influences of the executive arm of government. The recommendation was to perhaps move it and transfer it to the NJC, and its first line charge of funding would actually come from the revenue of the Federation. But do you think that there is the political will to do that? To be able to insulate INEC, remove it from the executive arm? Do you think that the executive arm as itself, knowing the power that INEC wields, would have the political will to take that decision?
Fantastic. That's why we are still where we are, and that is why we are talking about that, and that's why in an attempt to force people from their homes to vote, we have to come up, create a compulsory voting. Meanwhile, the most important that you have to adhere with, that will enhance voter turnout, you are shying away from it. You now want to criminalize people for not voting, even when they don't trust the system. I talked about that NJC earlier, and the truth of the matter is that people who argue against it will say, NJC, who are the NJC? These are judges, and the chief judge is the head of the NJC. And the chief judge is appointed by who?
By the president.
By the president. So really, it comes back. It could be a phone call away. I am not saying that they will actually do the phone call away. But the judiciary today, people, if you check a lot of index or research, you'll see that the Nigerian judiciary, the trust in the Nigerian judiciary has nosedived. Particularly, the trust in judicial pronouncement on elections. The judiciary till today, even though they try to remove themselves, till today, people still refer to the Imo election as a case for concern. That someone who took fourth eventually became first. You may not like it, but that's the perception today. NJC may not, but in our proposal, NJC remains the chair, but there are other members of that panel. For instance, you should have the NBA, you should have the NLC, you should have the TUC, you should have the NUJ president and all of that. You should have CSOs, so that even if you are able to corruptly capture all of them, there may be one who will blow the whistle.
The minority in the majority.
Just maybe you call it a minority. After all, the judiciary usually writes what they call the minority report.
Yes.
Or maybe you call it a shadow report. Because a minority report is actually a shadow report, mimicking to say, well, yes, they have agreed. That's the general. That's democracy. The majority will have their way. The minority will have their say. A shadow report or minority report is having your say. So we can actually get to that point to say minority, just one individual who will expose everybody. Create and try to disincentivize the process. That only those who would have gone through this process. It's not the way it is done now. Only former President Goodluck Jonathan, having participated in that Waste Committee process, because Jonathan's government, even though it was he was vice president, but he was in the government, was the one who set up the waste committee. And there were evidence that suggests that only Jonathan, maybe a few others, agreed to the report presented by the waste committee. And that in the feedback that came was that he said, if this is the way to strengthen our electoral system, why don't we implement it? And history was now kind to him. He became president. And he went he asked, who is the best guy to run our election and clean it up? There is Professor Achairo Jega, a member of that same committee. Jega became the national chair of INEC. Of course, innovations came. Part of the innovation was introduction of electronic into the process, which is also a waste recommendation. He tried to implement some of those. He had resistance, even from the National Assembly. You recall the story of the smart card reader that was almost killed until they said, no, the smart card reader is just to remove infiltrators who want to vote, but not necessarily playing any role. That the manual accreditation will still continue. Today, INEC will tell you the reason why the beavers was a game changer is because it has eradicated all of the ghost voters.
Okay.
What I mean is this. Those days, there are some states, the voter turnout there is like Gary that is swelling. But now, it is different. Technology. Technology has moved from just smart card reader to beavers to IREF. The next is the voting process. Once we get there, we would have done. I mean, just to quickly add that in India, with that population, 600 million plus turning out to vote, declaring an election does not take more than maximum 24 hours. In Nigeria, you are waiting for a result to come from Kanu, from Benue. That the last result that came in 2023 election came from Rivers, the last to be announced. Meanwhile, result had come from Northeast. Supposed hard to reach location.
All right, Austin, we thank you very much for coming on this morning. It's a continuing conversation. Electoral reform in Nigeria is something that must necessarily continue if we do really want our democracy to grow. Thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. Austin Aigbe, the Advocacy Officer and ECOWAS Liaison Lead of the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS, talking to us about the agitation for the adoption of the Justice Uwes report and the appointment of INEC commissioners that took place recently. All right, thank you so much, Austin. And that's where we're leaving it this morning on Kakaki, the African Voice as well. It's been the long haul from 6 a.m. We thank you for spending time with us, and we ask that you join us again on Wednesday for the midweek edition of the program.